Hello, I'm Luke Coasters, and today I'll be reviewing Zadra at Energylandia, a huge 206 foot tall RMC iBox track, which opened on the 22nd of August 2019. The ride gained so much hype once announced, which increased during the construction, and the ride managed to live up to the hype for most, with it receiving stellar reviews upon opening. But honestly, I didn't see any of the hype. It was evidently a less airtime focused RMC, and even the review said it had relatively weak and little airtime compared to the other elite RMCs. But seeing as RMC really shines when it comes to airtime, I just didn't see why everyone else loved the coaster. However, this coaster completely subverted my expectations, and I'll get into why in this video. Zadra is a part of the new Dragon Zone in Energylandia, which is the first phase in the park's next huge expansion on the other side of the road which bisects the park. Zadra has a massive presence throughout the whole area, with it being visible from Zadra has a massive presence throughout the whole park, with it being visible from everywhere in the park. When entering Dragon Zone, you get a great view of the ride, which is just absolutely huge. The area as a whole is fairly well themed, with some detailed buildings and an overall great atmosphere. However, when I visited in August 2020, the area was still not finished, and it was evident as there were a couple areas which lacked theming. The plaza for Zadra was great and fairly impressive, with a huge castle style building. However, the rest of the queue line lacks any theming. As you've probably heard if you've seen any video about Zadra, it has an unnecessarily long queue line, but it has been shortened since 2019, but it was still way too long. You do get some great views of the whole coaster whilst walking through the queue line, so it isn't too bad, and luckily the wait times were minimal because of Energylandia's amazing dispatch times, which are honestly the best I've seen at any park. Unfortunately, it seemed like Energylandia was switching Zadra from 1 train ops to 2 train ops, then back to 1 train ops every now and then, which got really annoying, so I hope they stop doing that in the future, but that doesn't take away from the incredible dispatch times. Eventually you will end up just under the station, which is where the lockers to the ride are, and lockers are mandatory if you have a larger bag, but there are bins on the ride platform for any smaller items. Luckily, the locker system to this ride and the whole of Energylandia in general is probably the best locker system of any park. It only costs 5 zloty, and you get a wristband which you can use throughout the whole park by just scanning your wristband. The lockers are also a decent size. You could probably fit 2 smaller or less full bags in, and you could easily fit 1 bulkier bag in the locker. You then go up some stairs, and there you are greeted by 3 separate lines: the front row line, the single rider line, and then every other row. However, the single rider line isn't actually a single rider line, it's more of a line for the front of the train, as it essentially works the same way as the line for the rest of the rows, except it's closer to the front of the train. You then get batched using a turnstile before standing in front of some doors which lead to the station. When the air gates are empty, the doors are open and you can choose your row, if you get there fast enough. While I'd say the front row is fun, the back is considerably better. So, like most RMC coasters, you sit in the train, and you have to do up your seatbelt, and then the ride-ups will push down your lap bar. However, on Zadra, before you even have time to do up your seatbelt, the ride-up will tighten it and push down your lap bar, just because the operations are so fast. And they also like to staple on this ride, but there are ways you can still get some room, but don't expect crazy amounts. I'd actually say that these lap bars feel slightly lighter than those on the other 2nd gen RMCs that I've ridden, but they're still not as good as the 1st gen RMC trains in my opinion. Once you dispatch, you go down into a short right hand turn, which is slightly jolty, but it's not uncomfortable at all, and if anything it's just slightly funny. The train then attaches to the chain lift, and it definitely doesn't struggle as much as some other RMC chain lifts do, and then you make the slow ascent to the top. In typical RMC fashion, all you can hear is the deafening sound of the chain lift, which is annoying, however it creates a cool atmosphere in the rest of the Dragon Zone. After ascending 206 foot or 62.8 meters, you crest the lift hill, and begin the 206 foot 90-degree descent, and this drop is really fun. The drop is almost identical to that on Steel Vengeance in terms of forces, with it in the front almost hanging you over the edge while you descend, before giving a hint of float as you plummet down vertically. And in the back you get yanked over the top, providing some decent ejector. It's by no means anything special, especially compared to some other RMC drops, since the crest is so drawn out. However, it is still really fun and a great way to kick off the ride. However, I would give Zadra's drop a slight edge over that on Steel Vengeance for 2 reasons. Firstly, on Zadra, the ride dives into the wooden structure at the bottom, which provides a really nice head chopper. And secondly, the pullout feels like it comes slightly later, making the airtime a tad more sustained, while also increasing the strength of the positives at the base of the drop. So when you begin the pullout, you dive into the structure, which helps increase the sensation of speed as you reach 75.2 miles per hour, or 121 kilometers per hour. And you also receive a surprising dose of positive Gs, which exceeds the strength of the positives found on every other RMC double track coaster that I've ridden. At this point, the coaster reaches almost 4 Gs, which is insane compared to most RMCs which usually cap out at around 3.5 G. This moment is also fairly sustained because of the size of the pullout, but it's abruptly interrupted by a small turning micro bunny which train navigates at high speed. I actually like how the micro bunny interrupts the positives, giving a decent pop of floater, making the coaster feel more lively and dynamic. But what makes this moment is really the laterals. As the micro bunny is on an unbanked right hand turn, you receive a whip of laterals which fling you to the left, making this a surprisingly aggressive moment which sets the tone for the rest of the ride. These laterals put this micro bunny leagues above any others on RMCs, as it makes what is generally a more tamed element really aggressive, and adds a sense of unpredictability as the turn is completely obscured by the structure. Before you know it, the train rises up and banks sharply to the left, giving an even stronger moment of positives while you will whip to the right because of the sudden change in banking. I love this sequence of elements as you go from positives at the bottom of the first drop to airtime and laterals on the micro bunny flinging you up and to the left before being thrown to the right while experiencing positives on the turning ascent. The positives get slightly weaker throughout the turn, but they are still fairly strong and sustained, which is made even more fun by the head choppers with the structure. You're pushed down into a seat before the train suddenly banks from left to right while cresting the top of the turnaround, giving some decent laterals which throw you to the left while receiving a violent punch of ejector, which is sustained for the whole long twisted descent, giving some great sustained ejector. I'd say that this element is similar in strength to the outward bank turn on Steel Vengeance, but less sustained. But it makes up for that as the transition into the airtime feels more aggressive, as you suddenly change from fairly strong positives to strong negatives. And you also experience some great laterals, not just only over the top of the element, but also some mild laterals during the descent. I just love how you're being flung from side to side, all whilst experiencing some amazing ejector. Whilst descending, the train banks from right to left, which gives mild laterals, and in the next valley the train banks to the right while giving solid positives, which almost match those at the bottom of the first drop, which is surprising, as on most coasters the first valley pulls the strongest positives. However, on Zadra many of the turns and valleys match the positives found on the first valley, and some even exceed that. The train then rises up into the first inversion, the 0G stall. It starts off with the somewhat whippy 180 degree twist, which is honestly nothing special, and then you are suspended for a couple of seconds, giving perfect sustained 0G, which is a really fun and unique sensation, but honestly I didn't find it to be too amazing. But I know that some people really love the inverted 0G sensation, and if you do then you're bound to love this part of the element. However, what makes this inversion for me is the exit to it. The train swiftly whips over 180 degrees, giving some powerful laterals which really violently throw you around. And whilst you're twisting, you experience a random sudden pop of ejector which just comes out of nowhere. This random pop of ejector makes this transition so aggressive as it just throws you around in every direction. This 0G stall ended up becoming one of my favourite inversions, mainly just because of the exit to it actually. After being flung around, the train banks to the right and then to the left in a fairly tight turn, which pulls some decent positives. As you ascend whilst turning, the train suddenly and violently banks 90 degrees to the right, giving some great laterals which throw you to the left. Whilst being flung around, you receive a decent moment of ejector, which is sustained as the train is held at 90 degrees for a brief period of time. While it isn't too strong, you can still feel yourself being thrown out of the train, and the fact that you're already banked at 90 degrees when experiencing this ejector makes it even more insane. The train then aggressively twists to the left in one of the most snappy transitions on any coaster, flinging you to the right with quite some force. While the train twists out, the airtime builds into strong ejector, so at this point you're just being flung out of your seat and to the right, and it really feels like this ride is trying to rip you apart. If you have your hands up, you'll lose all stability in your upper body, and you will be pretty much folded over to the side and kept there as the train makes a tight left hand turn, delivering solid positives. As I've already said, I just love the juxtaposition in force, which other RMCs really lack. It helps accentuate the airtime, and it makes the laterals feel even stronger and more sustained, as the positives make it harder to recover from being flung to the side. The train continues the descent, while turning before traversing a fairly drawn out transition in which the train banks from left to right, and into another turn, which is equally as forceful as the last. Also in this moment the sensation of speed is incredible, as you are so low to the ground flying by some of the ledges of the ride. Unfortunately, this moment of positives isn't too sustained, as the turn is interrupted by the train ascending into a huge airtime hill. Now I wasn't too sure what to expect from this hill, as I've heard some say that it only has floater, but then others say it has sustained ejector. And to be fair, in the morning the hill starts off with some good floater, which builds up into weak ejector as the train crests the hill, but later in the day, it starts off as weak ejecta which builds up slightly throughout the hill. It's by no means nothing insane, and I would say it's actually like a huge version of the sustained hill on Untamed. However, despite this hill being less aggressive to the prior elements, it's still so much fun. So it could be considered a dead spot, but it still has some really fun forces. Being pressed into a restraint for a good few seconds is an amazing experience, and time to recover before the finale. The train then banks to the right while descending, and then turns slightly to the left while rising up into the second inversion. Now before I discuss this inversion, I just want to say, no RMC 0G roll has really blown me away, and generally I would say that they're some of the weaker moments on RMCs. However, on Zadra, the train flies through this inversion, giving mild laterals all while ascending, but it only turns 270 degrees, so at the top you're banked at 90 degrees. And also at the top there's a random jolt of laterals which violently throws you to the left, and while descending, the train overbanks slightly, throwing you to the right, giving yet another surprising moment of laterals. And to experience all of these laterals while traversing a steep descending right hand turn, giving great positives deep within the wooden structure. While the inverting part of the element isn't the best, the rest is so amazing. It is so disorienting as you just can't tell where you are because of the structure, and the laterals just seemingly randomly throw you from side to side, so you can't tell where is up and where's down, and this is the only inversion that really gave me that sensation on a coaster. The coaster then levels out while exiting the structure and enters a double down. The first hill just has weak ejecta as the hill is so drawn out. However, I do like how the transition into the airtime is so sudden, but overall this airtime moment is one of the weakest on the ride. But the sensation of speed, and the fact that you just go from great positives to the airtime, makes the airtime feel much more aggressive, making for a really fun airtime moment, but nothing too special. The train then rises up slightly, and goes into the second dip of the double down, while the train navigates an unbanked turn to the left. This airtime moment is so much stronger than the previous. It feels similar to the hill under the double inverting corner stool on Untamed, but slightly more sustained, so it's fairly strong, but still not on the level of Storm Chaser or even Lightning Rod. But what I love about this element is that while you are flying out of your seat, the fact that the ride turns during this airtime moment creates some really good laterals, which pin you to the right side of the train, and before you can return upright, the train suddenly whips to the right in a tight transition, giving decent laterals which push you to the left, which feels even more aggressive since you're being thrown from one side to another. You are then pushed into your seat as the train navigates a really tight right hand turn, which is interrupted as the train whips to the left in a tiny twisted hill. You go from great positives to some decent ejecta air and back to positives, all while the train navigates an insanely snappy transition, giving mental laterals which violently throw you from left to right whilst being popped out of your seat. This makes the airtime feel even stronger, as the airtime almost blends with the laterals, giving an insane combination of forces. It is hard to explain just how aggressive this element is. And even from off-ride, the ride goes so fast through the element that it doesn't even look real, and when riding it's just a blur of violent forces in every direction. This element just tries to kill you, and while the forces aren't the most sustained, the sheer strength of them really makes it. You then go from the airtime into another intense left-hand turn, before rising up into the final inversion. The train hauls through this inversion and it's fairly snappy, and you get some decent laterals while traversing it. This then leads into a short but small turn into the brakes, which probably has the strongest positives on the whole ride. With loads of speed, the train slams hard into the brake run, which is just way too short, throwing you forward, which is quite uncomfortable. It is easily the most forceful brake run that I've experienced, and it makes for a really thrilling end to the ride. I really love how the ride concludes, from the second hill of the double down to the final turn, as what makes it so good is that there are just constant laterals throwing you from side to side on every subsequent element, making the ride just feel so belligerent. And it's also great how some amazing positives and negatives are thrown in as well, making this final sequence even crazier. And that final inversion is just so much fun as the train flies through it, even though I'd say it's the weakest element in the finale. I know many people complain about the duration of the ride, but honestly for me it didn't feel like it was too short. And while the train still has loads of speed towards the end, I don't mind, as it means the ride keeps an amazing pace and no element really underdelivers. And as I've said before, that final brake run with so much speed is just ridiculous. I would say that this is definitely tied with Lightning Rod for the best paced RMC. Not only does it maintain the high speed to the very end, but most importantly every element delivers strong forces, with the only relatively dead spot being a huge sustained ejecta hill, which is just a testament to the overall quality of the individual elements on this coaster. I would also say that Zadra is very different from most RMCs, which I think many people would find to be a positive. What I thought would be its greatest flaw actually ended up being its greatest strength, and that is the airtime, or the relative lack of it actually. Even though the airtime isn't as abundant as on most other RMCs, it was still better than I expected, and it's fairly strong and aggressive, but by no means the strongest. But I don't mind, as instead the coast focuses on other forces, namely the laterals and positives. This really benefits the ride, making it feel more aggressive and lively, and it really helps to improve the pacing, as while most RMCs have decent laterals, none deliver to the quantity or quality that Zadra has, with only the individual elements of lightning rods, twist and shout, and wildfire's outward bank wave turn even coming close to what is found on Zadra, and on Zadra they are way more prevalent throughout the whole layout. These laterals make for two of RMC's best elements, with the outward banked wave turn and the twisted hill at the end, and it also helps to improve typically less exciting elements such as the inversions and the micro bunny. Then you add the positives, which adds more thrills as you're constantly experiencing good forces, because when you aren't experiencing airtime, you instead experience decent positives, and as I said before, this ride pulls 4G, which is let alone insane. Then all of the valleys and turns pull at least 3.5G, with no elements failing to do so, which is just insane, and it really benefits the overall pace and flow of the ride. The ride just flows so well from start to end, with this flow only really being interrupted by the huge sustained hill. But this hill is a nice change from RMC's typically shorter snappy bunny hills, which Zadra is generally lacking in. I don't mind the fact that Zadra is for the most part devoid of these smaller hills, as it suits the fast pace of the ride, and instead it focuses on larger but equally aggressive moments, which most RMCs don't have, so it is a really nice change. If you do enjoy these smaller pops of air, then the ride still delivers hints of that with the final 3 airtime moments, but it is far from the focus of the ride. Though to be fair, the ride doesn't even have a main focus as it's just so diverse, and I would even go as far to say that this is the most diverse RMC. It has all the forces in every direction, sustained airtime, quick bursts of airtime, snappy transitions, more drawn out unbanked turns which should deliver laterals, some intense 0G rolls, and that amazing 0G stall, so this ride really has everything you could want. I would say that this ride isn't the best in every department, even in the laterals which it really excels at, but it incorporates all the factors needed for an excellent coaster, and it does them all fairly well. One other thing that I need to point out is the night ride on this coaster, and this is honestly what I wanted Steel Vengeance's night ride to be like. The structure isn't too lit up, but it is lit up in the places it needs to be. First off, diving in and out of the structure at night is insane, and the ride absolutely hauls at night. But the two things about the night ride that really stood out to me were firstly the 0G stall, and usually I'm not one to talk about the scenery or the views during a ride, but seeing the rest of Energylandia all beautifully lit up while inverted was honestly a surreal experience. And also that second 0G roll in the structure, and the subsequent downhill turn, was also really good. It was already disorienting enough during the day, but at night, when all you can see is the structure lit up around you, it's just crazy, and hard to put into words. And honestly, I would say that this is one of my favourite night rides on any coaster, and easily my favourite RMC night ride. So I just love Zadra. It does what I didn't think RMC could do, and it delivers everything I want in a coaster. It is fast paced, aggressive, relentless, and overall just has some great forces. I loved everything about it, even the inversions, which is impressive as inversions in general aren't my favourite elements. This ride is just insane right up until the very end, and it also features some of my favourite elements on any coaster. If I had one criticism of the coaster, it would actually be the drop, as while it is really fun, it didn't blow me away as much as some of my other favourite coasters did on the drop. But it doesn't even matter too much to me, as by the end I was so blown away with the other elements that I had forgotten about the relatively weak drop. But then again, it is still a 90 degree 206 foot drop, so it is going to be amazing. So taking into account everything Zadra does well, I'm going to have to give it a high score of 98 out of 100. And the reason it isn't quite a perfect score is honestly mostly down to the airtime strength, and slightly also because of the restraints, but that score is still insanely high. While Zadra isn't quite my number one, it isn't too far off, but the reason why I rank the coasters above it higher is just because they take the aggressive relentless forces to another level. However, I know many people have compared this coaster to Steel Vengeance, but most haven't been lucky enough to ride both Zadra and Steel Vengeance, so I know many are asking the question, does Zadra beat Steel Vengeance? And for me it's very close. Steel Vengeance just has a sheer quantity, and honestly in terms of airtime strength, they're pretty much equal, but Zadra has greater variation in force. These two incredible RMCs are right next to each other in my rankings, but actually I would say for me there is a clear winner, as I came off that one coaster and I was much more astounded and satisfied, but I'm not going to say what it was, as in the near future I'll be making a video on my top 25 coasters, where it will be revealed which one I prefer. So anyways, thanks for watching this review of Zadra at Energylandia. I had a blast riding this coaster, and I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you enjoyed my review, then it would be much appreciated if you liked and subscribed for more rollercoaster content, and comment down below your opinions on Zadra at Energylandia.